say thank you all again for coming. This is the third Zoom drinks tasting you've done, I think, and it's always really nice to see everybody all over the country. So thank you all for coming. That's really all I've got to say. Maybe if you could stick yourselves all on mute. If you do want to ask a question, just one mute yourself, or put it in the chat box, whatever it's called at the side. Yeah, sure, we're all used to this stuff now. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Susy Atkins.
Kate, can I just say, I hope you don't mind, my husband's joining us because I didn't feel I could sit here necking back wine with him sitting in the other room. So I do hope you don't mind. My husband Philip's here too. He's a great, got a great palate for wine. So there we go.
He's very welcome. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you all very much for having me. And I need to introduce Toby Amphlett, who's there in the corner of, certainly in the top right hand corner of my screen, who is from Penfolds Wynns, the company Treasury Wine Estates that owns both those wineries, and he is a sort of ambassador for these brands, so he makes my life terribly easy. There's nothing that can't be answered, because if I can't answer it, Toby sure can, and he's going to be sort of co-hosting with me and giving us lots of nuggets of information. I'll do a bit of housekeeping first, just so you know how it's going to run. As I say, please get stuck in. I really hate the idea that people are sitting waiting to be told to get stuck in, so please do. But if you want to know the order, we're going to do the Canunga Hill first. The Canunga Hill first, if you would rather get stuck in with the one we're going to do first. Toby, which one did we say second?
And then it will be the Wynns Black Label. So
then the Wynns Black Label, and then finishing with the Bin 28. So you might want to, as you're listening to us and slurping, do it in that order, but it's up to you if you don't, but that's the order we're going to do it. So Canunga Hill, Wynns, and then Bin 28. As I said to a few people that joined a bit earlier, you could decant these wines. That would slightly improve them. It would open up their aromas and flavours. But to be honest, I prefer doing Zoom tastings like this not to, for the simple practical reason that I kind of want what remains to stay in the bottle. I want to drink it, reseal it and drink it over the next couple of days. And you will get just the same effect if you have a big glass and you swirl the little bit of wine you're tasting in the bowl of the glass. You will still aerate it, soften it down, bring out its aromas, so you don't need to decant them. And as I say, they're often more conveniently left back in the bottles. So do or don't, or decant what's left afterwards, so you can have them really opened up. We're going to talk about the three wines, all from South Australia. The first is a Shiraz Cabernet blend, so two great varieties there. The second is Cabernet Sauvignon only, and the last one is Shiraz only. So we're looking at these two varietals either together or separately. They've all come from slightly different areas and slightly different treatments in the winery, and Toby's got a brilliant slide selection that's going to give us some of the kind of technical information and maps and bits and bobs like that. But as I said at the beginning, Wynns is owned by the same company as Penfolds, so they are sister or brother wineries, if you like, and they both go back such a long way. We're talking about very famous wineries that were established, way back in the 19th century, and have been, risen in stature ever since. Kind of interesting time in Australia. You think back to those days, people used to drink fortified wines mostly, and they didn't export at all, of course. Or if they did export, it was only the port and sherry styles. A bit of a hiatus in the mid 20th century, as the world switched more to table wines and Australia hadn't caught up. And then you get this switch to table wines when Australia starts to really hit its stride and starts to realise it can make absolutely fantastic Cabernets and Shirazes, and we see the rise of the premium unfortified table wine. Can we get the slides going, please, Jonathan? We're looking at some emails at the moment.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the slides up.
It's fine. Toby, can I let you say a quick hello and tell us? Oh, here we go.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Susie, and thank you for everyone else welcoming me to the call as well. Just a quick one from me. I actually started my wine career way back as a little kid, got sent out to Bordeaux and was chucked amongst the vines, and I had to help doing the harvest for a few years. And I ended up in the winery at when I became 18, and I very much thought I was going to become a winemaker, but I ended up back in the UK at a place called Pumpton College, which is southern Sussex, Australian wines, and of course full circle round to Penfolds again. So I've been with Penfolds for about 3 years, but on the side I'm also a wine judge at the IWSC. So if we want to talk about palates and how to taste wine, then that might be another different call, but I'm very excited to be back with Penfolds and talking about Australia again, because it is a very exciting time for Australia to be making wines. But it's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Susy.
I think it really is. And I think one of the main things that people are realising, the slightly more sophisticated wine drinker is realising, is that Australia isn't just about big brands. And importantly, it's not just about cross-regional brands that are fruit taken from enormous areas. There is more recognition now among consumers of the regional stars of this enormous country. Now, why would anyone think all Australian wine would taste the same? Once you start into the premium side of it, you get these incredible expressions of regions. But Toby, can you just tell us something right up front about Penfolds? Because Penfolds does blend, you don't tend to get things from just one vineyard, do you? They're blending across the sort of sub-region, if you like.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And so actually there's 3 philosophies that we look at with Penfolds. And we actually break it down to single vineyard, single region, and then multi-regional. And our kind of philosophy is that we go where the fruit grows best. So we're not limited to just one vineyard. In some cases where we are trying fruit and is exceptional, we like to blend that in and make it a single vineyard wine. But we just, like you said, Susy, Australia is vast, and there's so many different pockets of great quality grapes coming out, and so many different influences, whether that's from the coast or whether that's from central or altitude wise, or even places like Tasmania where we're starting to get fruit from now. Yeah. And it's this kind of philosophy that, you know, just because it tastes great, and it doesn't mean we can't then put it into a wine. So we have to then go by this kind of idea that our house style is multi-regional blends. Some of our flagship wines, such as Grange, if you've heard of Grange before with Penfolds, our top red is very much multi-regional. So we kind of go against what the old world and new world kind of talk about. So
but
in France,
at the same time, you're cherry picking, aren't you? Because when you buy cheap, big brand Aussie wines, I mean, really cheap. They tend to use fruit sourced from the really high yielding areas inland, Riverina, Murray, Riverland. And they truck those grapes across vast areas of land and end up with very uniform style of wine. Whereas, although you're sourcing sometimes from different pockets of land, it's very much cherry picking in order to create a particular flavour.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually something to do with our fruit grading process. And it's very much hands-on from our winemakers and who we work with as our co-op growers or our growers ourselves. So not all our vineyards are owned by us, but we work very closely with these growers. And in fact, one thing just to highlight on that is that just because they're a grower with us 1 year doesn't mean they're a grower with us the next year. The fruit has to be exceptional to go into some of our wines.
You cruelly sack them if they have a bad year.
No,
not very good PR.
Well, this is what's so exceptional about it, is that actually we've just celebrated 100 years consecutively with one grower. So they have produced for 100 years exceptional quality fruit, and it's all to do with that fruit grading process that our vineyard team and our winemakers go through. But I'm sure we'll jump into it as we get through.
Well, let's just have a little bit of the basics. So Penfolds was founded in 1844 by medical doctor Christopher and his wife Mary Penfold. They planted the vine cuttings that they'd taken to Australia. From where is that? Because it doesn't actually say on the...
So we wider, it would be European cuttings. And then actually from a bit more of a narrow point, it's actually Bordeaux. Dr. Christopher Penfold was actually from Stenning near Brighton, if anyone knows that area. And he came over with his wife and daughter, actually, Georgina. Brought cuttings from various places, but predominantly Bordeaux. So some of the Cabernets that you might try today, especially with the Bin 28s, still is from that time 170 years ago for some of those grapes. So very interesting.
We will talk about old vines, definitely.
Yes,
but
of course.
Save that thought for a moment.
Yes, too much.
I
to
love
talk
the
about,
fact that when Christopher died, Mary Penfold took over and ran the winery very successfully from 1870 until she retired in 1884, and then her daughter Georgina took over. So you've got really strong women of the Victorian era here. And by then it was making a third of all Australia's wine. So, huge concern already.
Yeah, and it's a very fascinating point. We love to celebrate Mary Penfold quite highly with among, well, not just Penfolds, but Treasury itself. She's such a strong female figure in that time because, Dr. Christopher Penfold, yes, he did plant the vines and he set up the winery alongside Mary. But it was actually because he had this clinic and he was treating people. And it was actually, he went out there as a doctor and he started making these small tonics, which he would give to people. And we always used to joke, it's not necessarily to cure people, but it definitely makes them feel better that they're drinking some of these fortified wines. But it's actually because he got so busy amongst that practice in the clinic, Mary really came in and started taking the reins, and she really went against the grain and started producing wines which Australia hadn't seen. So a real character in the wine industry, and we're thankful for it. She changed a lot of wine styles, so she's a big part.
She sounds brilliant. Is there a biography of her?
I'd love to know a bit more. Yes, I actually don't know if there is a book out, but we have vast amount of details about her writings and everything. So maybe we should piece together a book.
Definitely.
From Penfold.
So they settled, and where they were farming grapes was around the Adelaide area. So we are firmly in South Australia here, and I believe the McGill vineyard was the first one to be planted, the McGill estate. So by 1907, it was South Australia's biggest winery. Then we jump to the next period of real note into the late 40s, when Max Schubert, who was a very, very famous person within the wine world, became their chief winemaker. And he was a great pioneer and experimental winemaker. And he evolved these reds that are capable of long aging. And he established Grange, which is the most famous wine, probably Australia's most famous wine, to be honest, but the great Grange of Penfolds cuvée. And then established the bin wines, the bin names. You see, you've got the bin 28 in the last one we're going to have, which basically just referred to the area of the winery where that particular wine was being made and resting. So they established this idea of bins, bin numbers, which is such a big thing in Australia now. But Toby, in fact, everyone, should we taste this first wine then? The Canunga Hill Shiraz Cabernet, which retails at around £10. I looked into it today and found it at £9 from lots of major retailers, Ocado, Asda, Tesco, Sainsbury's. And this is the newly released 2019 vintage. Hope everyone's got that. Canunga Hill Shiraz Cabernet blend. I couldn't find out the proportions. Can you tell us how much of each?
Yes, this is a funny one with Canunga Hill. And actually, Susie, it might be worth actually jumping through to the slides so people can see a bit more information on it. Please do that, yeah. We are skipping a few slides. We'll come back, Jonathan, if that's okay. But we'll just skip through and we'll
do Canunga Hill, great.
There's a couple more which looks at the vineyard, but let's just bring up that text sheet so people can have a look at some of the tasting notes on it. But yes, we don't tend to speak about the Canunga Hill percentages because it does vary quite a bit year on year.
That's it. If we can stick with that slide for the moment, that would be brilliant. Sorry.
That's perfect. It does change quite a bit year on year, but generally speaking, it's around 80% Shiraz, 20% Cabernet for the Canunga Hill range at least. So what I really expect from that, if it's Shiraz, is much more structure and much more plush fruit and vibrancy coming out of the glass.
So this is a traditional Aussie blend, really. You get the sort of structure and a bit of spiciness from the Shiraz. Cabernet should give it tannins and some longevity, although I think this one is meant to be drunk a bit younger than the other two we're going to taste. It's 14.5% alcohol, so that's quite pokey. And the fruit has been taken from some of the key spots in South Australia. This is not from one of the kind of workhorse inland regions. So we are looking at premium areas such as Barossa Valley, McLaren Vale, Langhorne Creek and Padthaway, which are all known for very high quality reds. And you're cherry picking from the vineyards there. And it has been aged in oak, although I couldn't find out details of exactly how long. I don't know if it says on
yes, it's around 10 months. So this specific vintage is actually 10 months in seasoned oak, and that just means it's older oak. It doesn't mean you get so much oak character, but you get subtle spice characters coming through. It just helps that fruit.
I think it's. I mean, that's a lovely. This is a really fresh wine to me. Is useful. Lovely, easy blackcurrant flavors. And I did get slightly spicy clove and cinnamon, maybe a bit violety as well, if we're going to be fanciful. It's obviously much less expensive than the other two. It's clearly meant to be enjoyed when it's relatively young. It's a lovely wine, very popular. You presumably make quite a big quantity of this one every year.
Yeah, we never speak about quantities necessarily, but yeah, we do make a lot of quantities for this wine in particular. And actually, it's just worth noting where this wine came from, if that's okay, Susie.
Yeah.
Actually, it was created in the 1970s, 76 to be more specific. And this was actually it actually started off as being called Red Claret when it came out, and the wines were about $1.50 to $2. Back in those days, so Australian dollars we're talking. Some of those wines are still being drunk today in the secondary market around 400 to 600 Australian dollars. So you can see how much of a price increase just for those very rare cases of first wines coming out. But a very interesting one that I always kind of break this down into 3 words about these kind of Canunga Hill range is value, quality, and consistency. Like, it's consistently year on year. The fruit is what we're looking at. And our chief winemaker, Peter Gago, we have lots of different winemakers, but our chief winemaker looks at the Canunga Hill range and he says, yes, we can make some of the best wines in the world, but if we're not making sure that this wine tastes great year on year, we're doing something wrong. So he very much looks at that bottom entry tier wines and make sure we're hitting that properly before we start looking at those kind of key players that Penfolds has. But very interesting one to look at. One more note on the Canunga Hill range is that we do a thing called recorking clinics, where we go around and offer people a chance, as a free service, a chance that they can take their old bottle, they taste a little bit out of it with the winemaker present, see how it's performing. We can say to them whether or not it's worth drinking now, if it's needs a couple more years, or even if it's a counterfeit wine, which is another different topic we won't talk about. And actually, the Canunga Hill range is very popular at these recorking clinics because it just lasts. People really can keep these for a very long time. And as you can see on the bottom of that slide, it says peak drinking now till 2026 is our recommended window. So there is still quite a lot. There's 5 more years for this bottle, but we're not saying don't keep it any longer. It can.
No, it's all relative, because when we get on to the other two, they can be kept for an extremely long time. But yeah, I mean, that's 7 years is quite a long time. Be interesting to see how it develops. It will obviously soften. That fresh primary fruit will be replaced with some more toasty, spicy, leathery notes, I think. But I suspect quite a lot of people do drink this cuvee fairly young.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And people love that younger wine styles. And even some of our wines, which we will talk about later on, even though we do recommend to keep them far longer in the cellar, people love that kind of young experience, that type vibrant, lots of fruit character. So, it's always subjective. It's down to, personal preference. So we're just there to kind of recommend when we think it might be best. So, yeah.
And I think, certainly is a very useful wine. This is going to be nice at barbecue. It's the obvious thing to say, but barbecues, when you've got kind of quite rare steaks and chops and things on the barbie, then that very vibrant, fresh, violety, plummy fruit, I think is going to be really nice. Yeah,
it's quite a rich wine. It's quite a lot of fruit straight away onto that palate. And, you tend to steer away from, I always look at kind of pairing with food as a weight kind of proportion instead of what actual type of protein or type of carb you're looking at. So it's generally quite a heavier wine, so steers towards that kind of congruent pairing where they're actually working together, not contrasting where they completely go against each other. It's very much to aid the food, and it's that larger kind of style. So yeah, heavier food types. As you said, that summer barbecue is something the Australians can't get away from, but it certainly helps having this style of wine at their barbecues for sure.
And notice the lack of sweetness, because I think a lot of, substandard, cheaper Australian wines have quite rightly been accused of tasting too sweet and jammy, confected, and you just don't get that with this. Although it's got that ripe fruitiness, it's actually dry, fresh, and pulled back, lifted slightly on the finish, which is, I think, what a serious wine drinker wants.
Yes, and it's great that you point that out, because it's all down to, again, that fruit grading process and where we're picking that fruit from. We're not just going to the kind of low flatland and put it into perspective. If we actually would to look at the region slide, I could probably explain that.
So let's do that. Jonathan, can you take us back to the earlier slides before this tech sheet, please? And Toby's got some pictures of where it's from. Okay, here we are. Toby, do take it away.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just went a bit funny then. So, I don't have to be the obvious one in the group to point it out, but that is Australia in the bottom left. And when we look into Australia a little bit more, there's multiple regions. And I don't know how large it is on your screen to kind of pinpoint that. Sorry if that is quite small. But we actually focus on that very middle section, which looks like a square box going to the very center of the country, right down. Yes, it's perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. That's South Australia. And a lot of our vineyards are from South Australia. In fact, even for Wynns, which is our second wine, there's a place called Coonawarra, which is a very famous region, which we'll come on to. And there are other places like New South Wales, which include the areas like Sydney, and possibly one of my favourite region names called Tumbarumba.
Oh, we all love Tumbarumba.
It's the weirdest name from the regions, but and then just south of that, Victoria. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me still.
Yep.
Yes, and just south of that is Victoria, and then just south of that again is Tasmania. And what we've got to note here is actually the next landmass down from Tasmania is actually Antarctica. So we have this incredible cold fetch that comes from Antarctica and is pooling just off that central coast, which is called the Limestone Coast, which Jonathan pointed out.
I can honestly say, having been to Tasmania, it is cold. I think
as well as where we're going
a little bit, Toby, on and off. Hello. Oh, you're back.
Sorry, yeah, it's a bit intermittent at the moment. Maybe that's just.
Can we change the next slide?
Yes, of course.
So this is actually.
Yes, this is a wonderful picture that was taken in 1900s, obviously, and this is our original site at the Adelaide, and so it's actually McGill Estate, and there's a small building on the curve of that road as it goes into the winery, and that is actually the Grange, and that's where Dr. Christopher Penfold and Mary Penfold set up their clinic, and that's where they were treating people. And actually, Jonathan, if you jump to the next slide, it will show you.
Obviously, this is where we are today. Toby's frozen again, but the same estate today. Can we jump to the next one? And then jump again. So we're looking at the various places where the grapes are taken from in South Australia here now. Rattenbully. And again, please. Slim Vineyard, Barossa Valley. I'm spent the vintage of 1994 in Barossa Valley, trying to help pick grapes and help in the winery, but probably not very successfully. More importantly, writing about what it was like to live in Australia through a harvest. It is very hot, Barossa, and you do get these incredible old vines, really ancient vines, so they're producing small amounts of incredibly concentrated fruit. It's a really remarkable place. Was settled by German people generally, bit of Germany that I think is now Poland, but very historic wine region, Barossa, and some of your grapes come from there, don't they? Some of those important grapes come from Barossa, don't they, Toby?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And actually some of our oldest vineyards come from Barossa, very famous for like the Shiraz or the Cabernet. So what we say, the quintessential grapes of Australia, and how perfect they are together. Sorry. I will sort out my internet and just see if you continue up.
Don't worry. I think we're hearing most of you. Let's move to try wine number 2, if people haven't already. So we're going to try the Wynns, which is the black label Coonawarra Cabernet Sauvignon. We'll skip through some of these more technical slides, which just show beautiful pictures of the winemaking process, and then we will get to Wynns, because we're now switching region, and we're now going to Coonawarra. To the Wynns estate, and we're tasting a wine that's 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. There's the technical sheet. Toby, do we have you? No, we don't. Okay, so the important thing about this part of South Australia Coonawarra is very famous for its red soils, terra rossa soils, that actually is a relatively thin strip of land. It's only about 9 miles by 1 mile. But it gives us this extraordinary soil with very free draining capabilities and a kind of water table at the bottom of it. And the Cabernet Sauvignon in particular, grown on these terra rossa soils in Coonawarra, is meant to be incredibly elegant and fresh for Australia. Slightly pulled back alcohol than some of the bigger wines you get from Oz, and just a level of finesse that is really exceptional. So this Cabernet Sauvignon is from Coonawarra. Toby, you back in the room? No, you're not. Yes, you are. No, he's not. Okay, let's give this one a go. So this is from the 2018 vintage. The Wynns Black Label Cabernet was first made in 1954, so it's a traditional, well-established cuvee, and it's known for being very intense but beautifully balanced and mid-weight, as opposed to very, very heavyweight Aussie. I hope you get the elegance of this wine. Let's give it a go. Toby, if you can hear me, do join in, but we may have lost you, I fear. I think we may have lost him down in Dorset. This wine has had 14 months in 20% new French oak and the remainder in older French oak. So the new French oak is giving us lots of oaky characteristics, and the older seasoned oak gives slightly more subtle spicing to it. But I can certainly taste the oak on that. There's that kind of wood spice, sandalwood, slightly vanilla character and quite grippy tannins on the finish, but beautifully balanced at the same time. This is nearly all, made from fruit grown in the Terra Rossa vineyards of Coonawarra. This wine costs more in the region of £25. It's available from Harvey Nichols and various independents. And the winery, headed up by Sue Hodder, who's a legendary winemaker for Wynns, suggests that it can be cellared until 2040. So I hope we're not committing terrible infanticide by opening this wine so young, but I hope you're enjoying the qualities of it. But you can tell that it's young. It's got quite an edge to it, and it will mellow and soften with that age. So if you've got snacks in front of you, cheeses or meats, or I've got salted almonds, some really good cheddar and some olives, get stuck in, because I think this is a food wine. I think it will go very well with steak and duck and all that sort of thing as well, and charcuterie. But it's not a wine I would have without food, I think, whereas the first one perhaps you could. Jonathan,
Susie, yes, I'm back. Sorry, it's
no, that's great.
It's been an absolute nightmare with this.
I feel for you. It's happened here before.
Rural living. So yes, you're on.
We're tasting the Wynns.
The Wynns Black Label. Great.
I've given some of the basic facts about it, but do you want to add something? Tell us about the Coonawarra estate. You've obviously, Wynns has really good holdings of this Terra Rossa soil, this relatively small patch of land that gives us this extraordinary red soil and these great winemaking qualities. You own a lot of that piece of land, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Wynns owns the largest amount of this land from Coonawarra, and it's an incredibly special region for wine production because there's only one other or two other places around the world which has similar soil types but not quite identical. And actually we really compare this region's climate like Bordeaux. In fact, we're almost identical. So when people are looking for a great quality Cabernet Sauvignon, which is not from the old world, they tend to focus towards Coonawarra. Now, yes, it's all to do with that Terra Rossa soil, and it's centuries, in fact, 500,000 years worth of change in the landscape to get where we are. And the Terra Rossa is actually an oxidized iron ore deposit, which is on the top. And actually, when you do rub that soil in your hands, it really does stain your hands red. It's an incredible quality. And it gives this kind of sense of a bit of a mockery, eucalyptusy, kind of dusty character to some of the wines, and not necessarily with this black label, but you certainly notice it. And what I love about the Wynns kind of styles of wine,
oh dear,
is they pick all their fruit individually, and bring that together, and then vinify all the parcels separately, and then they blend it together. So it's a really meticulous process to try and fine tune that perfect kind of Cabernet style. But if you do want a fantastic Cabernet style around the world, I always go to Coonawarra. Just for what it gives.
It is rightly very famous for Cabernet Sauvignon. I believe they first planted Shiraz there because that was the very popular grape at the time, and then over time realised actually the grape that really suits this unique patch of land is Cabernet, and certainly for, I think, all the time I've been writing about wine, Coonawarra has been famous for Cabernets. It's not just the soil though, is it? I was mentioning that very good drainage, it's got a water table underneath it, but it's also quite close to the coast. So it's not as baking hot. And Toby mentioned earlier about looking at South Australia, and the bits down at Coonawarra are not, I mean, they're hot in the summer on a hot day, but they're tempered by being relatively close to the coast, and you get breezes coming in. And Coonawarra is not as hot as some areas, is it?
No, that's absolutely right, Susie. It's about 80 kilometres from the coast, and what we call the limestone coast. And that cooler climate is perfect for our ripening because we get this slow ripening process in the grapes. It means there's that less sugar. It might be slightly romanticized, but it's a slightly slower ripening process, less sugar accumulation in the grapes. That tends to be less alcohol, is what it equates to. But you get a slower ripening in flavor, so you get this kind of really elegant style. And you might find with the Cabernets that they're quite cassis or green, they're quite pencil shaving kind of character. It's this kind of really like elegant green character is what I'm going through with Coonawarra, and it's this slow ripening which is perfect for the region. You do get these fantastic qualities of grapes coming out of there. It's really unique. And like you said, Susie, it's so close to the coastline. So it's like this perfect accumulation of how far it is from the coast, the soil type helping it, and then the viticultural teams amongst Coonawarra to get the fruit to where it is. It's an almost perfect place to be growing some of the grapes. And
again, just to say, a lot of the very cheap Australian wines that are made in bulk are made far inland. I mean, obviously not in the centre of Australia, but they are hundreds and hundreds of miles inland, where it's baking hot. They get very high yields, and therefore you can make a $4.99 wine. But this is a totally different beast being made. We say close to the coast. Notice it's 50 miles, but for Australia that is close.
That is very close for Australia.
50 miles is nothing in Australia. So you get the influence of the ocean, and you get this wonderful elegance from this perfect combination of the Terra Rossa iron-rich soils and then the location. So terroir is really showing in this wine. Yeah,
very much so. And Susie, I don't know if you talked about the history with Wynns much at all.
You go ahead and say that, please.
This is actually a Scottish chap who started Wynns back in the day. So it was back actually in 1891 that he came over from Scotland to Coonawarra and started planting these grapes. And right on your front central label is the Three Gabled Winery. So it's a really famous winery for Wynns. And that was actually established in 1896 with the first vintage in 1897. And it wasn't called Wynns back then. Actually, a lot of the land was just underneath John Riddoch, the Scottish chap. And he really had that eye for quality of region, started planting around. And actually it wasn't until 1951, and it was the Wynns brothers coming over to the land, and they saw quality and they pleaded to get the land and then establish Wynns Coonawarra Estate. They wanted to keep some of the traditions and some of the nods in their wine. In fact, their flagship wine is called John Riddoch, so it's a bit of a nod to the founder of the kind of land there, but or the vine, should I say. But yeah, incredible amounts of history, similar to that kind of Penfolds, lots of European influence, lots of vine cuttings coming from Europe, and then kind of fine tuning over the years. But just, yeah, I always just think this is, if you want terroir in a glass, or if you want to challenge when people say what's terroir, just give them a bottle of Black Label and they'll understand it a little bit easier.
There's a lovely cherry character to this, I think. Kind of dark, but
a black cherry character.
Yeah, but there's red cherry on the finish. It kind of lifts on the finish as well. And I do get a bit of that pencil shavings. Almost, dare I say, slight taste of blood, a slight taste of iron in the wine. Maybe that's
irony. Yes.
Maybe that's just being suggestible because I know there's iron in the soil, but there's something there that almost tastes a bit like lamb to me. There's something a bit bloody, a bit irony in there, and I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Yeah, of course. I've never actually had that as a tasting note, but I do quite like that. It's a great one, and like you've actually mentioned lamb, and I always choose Cabernet when I go for a roast lamb. But our winemaker here, Sue Hodder, I don't know if Susie, if you've mentioned, but she loves pairing this with a kind of pan-seared, salmon-skinned, or kind of like a fish taco sort of style. She really likes kind of going against the kind of traditional food pairings as you would assume for a red wine. You know, people always worry about red wine and red meat, or white wine and white meat as well, but actually it really does work. It's that kind of seared side which really rubs up well. We're going
to have to try this. And we were talking about this before we actually started the event. I know Sue has suggested lots of fish things with this wine, and I can't quite get my head around that. Salmon more than any other fish, but she hasn't just suggested salmon, has she? She's really into eating fish with this wine, and I can't quite get my head around it, but I'm going to give it a go. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely, give it a go.
You can only try, and I get what you mean by kind of a seared skin on salmon, or maybe tuna steaks might work.
Yes, tuna steaks would work really well.
I would go straight for lamb, or in fact duck with this, I think, or steak.
Duck's a
Obviously
great one.
Steak is going to be really good. But it is young. I did mention when you were off air for a moment that that we are recommended to sell it until 2040. Have you tasted old Wynns black labels? How do they age?
Fantastic bottles of wine, and I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to try something so old. So how it really works is you generally get you start losing fruit character, and you start getting this secondary character or tertiary character, essentially, which is this kind of leathery cigar box. You get sort of like a date or a prune. Imagine you've left fruit out in the sun and it kind of dries up like a sun-dried tomato sort of style. You get more refined, concentrated flavor, and it kind of really drops acidity a little bit depending on quality of wine, but it comes really approachable. You get this almost a second life. You go through this like dip phase where it doesn't quite taste right. You think you should have opened it earlier, which is always the worry with selling wine, but then you suddenly get this magnificent, after about 15 years, magnificent qualities of how the synergy between fruit and aged character coming together. It's marvelous. In fact, the black label Cabernet, we've consecutively been making this wine for over 60 years back to back. So we make sure this is the first wine we produce in the winery before anything else, because it has to be right. This wine is quintessential of the region. You know, we want to make sure it's perfect. And not too long ago, there was a vertical tasting of every single year that this wine was made, and I wasn't invited. I
didn't get that invite.
Didn't get the invite.
Must have got lost in the post.
Yeah, must have done. But fascinating to see that even the first vintages are still drinking exceptionally well, and that's actually down to fruit quality. Yes, there's winemaker influence in that, but it has to be fruit quality which leads that. So fantastic to see Black Label being such an important part of Australian wine.
Can I ask you? People often ask about vintage variation in Australia. You know, we all know that if we're buying fine Bordeaux or Burgundy, we need to look at buying from a good vintage because there is significant vintage variation. But what about Australia? I mean, I think I know what I think, but tell us.
It's a tricky one with Australia. Yes, we're constantly battling temperatures, and in more recent years, fires, which is even more scary to especially for the farmers and the growers. You get a thing called smoke taint with a lot of those kind of fire areas. But like, fortunate enough for us, it hasn't affected us hugely, but still devastating for the region. So yes, we have to go. So again, our mantra with Penfolds, the same similar mantra with Coonawarra. In fact, it's a little bit less affected as it's almost a perfect climate. But with Penfolds, at least, our mantra is that, you know, going where the fruit grows best. And when we're forced to go somewhere else because it's starting to get warmer, we're starting to get too much sugar accumulation, the wine tends to then start going towards that £4, £5 wine you were mentioning. So we have to go to a different region. We have to start picking different areas. So we either go somewhere where it's really high altitude and it's a slower ripening period, it's cooler generally, or we just go further south. So it's opposite, obviously, northern hemisphere. The further north, in Scotland it's freezing, but in the southern hemisphere, the further south we go, the colder it gets, and that's why we're seeing a lot of fruit now coming from Tasmania, which is that southern island, and lots of sparkling wine production down there, as it's higher acidity in the grapes, lower alcohol. And so if you ever want a really good sparkling from Australia, I tend to go to Tasmania. Similar kind of climate to almost England at the moment. So, there's fantastic quality English sparkling. We're not going to go into that, but it's similar ballpark with Tasmania in there, starting to get those slightly thinner red skin grapes like Pinot Noir. So that's where we're tending to go more so now with Penfolds and our Pinot Noir styles is places like Tasmania for that slow, cool climate ripening periods.
You've got a lot of areas to choose from, I suppose.
Lots of areas.
So if you have a vintage that needs correcting in some way, you can pull in fruit from a region that gives a sub-region that gives you those missing characteristics.
100%, yes. It's slightly like a pick and mix in some cases, but more glamorous, should I say, than that. We're not limited to one area, as with some of the old worlds are.
But you are with the Wynns, though, aren't you? That is just Coonawarra.
We are, yes.
So what if Coonawarra has a really bad year?
We tend to not see it, actually. It's more for the warmer climate areas like Barossa or further inland. You're starting to get more of those effects or swings of temperatures or vintage variations. But with Coonawarra, it is a fascinating region because you just have so many aspects that control that. You do get similarities year on year that we don't have to worry about. If there is a vintage where it is a lot warmer, we expect much more sugar development, much more faster ripening of flavor in our grapes. So it's all about how we then manage it on the vines. And Susy, if you don't mind me going into a little bit more detail on how you manage that vine, it's a fascinating concept, but we either have to pick earlier and we tend to get a bit more of a greener character. Essentially, if you imagine picking an apple off a tree early, it'll be quite acidic or astringent. And that's similar to what we're having to do. We might be forced to pick slightly earlier, or we do a thing in the cooler years where actually we need a bit more ripening or concentration. We do a thing called green harvest. So we go around and we're taking loads of grapes off to concentrate that ripening into the smaller bunches, if that makes sense. If the more bunches on the vine, the spread of kind of ripening for that plant. But if you're taking those bunches off and there's one or two, we're concentrating that flavor in. So it's ways that we kind of work with the grapes on vines to kind of deal with that vintage variation. But like you said, it's Coonawarra, we don't get too much of that. So with Penfolds, we're lucky multi-region.
Jonathan, if you could move the slides on, have we got some pictures of the Terra Rossa soil?
Yeah, we should do. Maybe one back, yes, that middle.
Yay. So there's the famous Wynns Gables, the Gables style to the winery. It's obviously still there to this day. It's one of the iconic wineries of Australia. And there's your Terra Rossa soil, looking happily red. That's very red, yeah. And then obviously Cellar Door is where you can pitch up and buy your wine. Coonawarra not nearly as touristy as some of the other regions of South Australia. It's quite far flung.
Yes.
But the dedicated wine lovers make it there, don't they?
Yeah, that's actually right. And there's just Sue Hodder, obviously a winemaker. She always jokes that a lot of Australians don't even know where Coonawarra is. And she says in her township, there's probably about 45, 50 people. So everyone does get on very closely with each other.
If anyone makes it out there, they'll have the cellar door a bit more to themselves, I suspect, than in downtown Tanunda, Barossa.
Yeah, that's true.
Talking of which, I think we need to taste wine number 3 now, which is obviously the one left, our Penfolds Bin 28 Columna Shiraz. Again, it's 2018 vintage, as the previous one was, but we're back up in the hotter areas. Toby, can you tell us a bit about where the Shiraz, 100% Shiraz, where 100%. It's sourced from, my old happy stomping ground?
Yes, and actually, if we keep on this picture, Jonathan, this is a perfect example. So this is Barossa. In fact, this is Columna Vineyard. And if you see on your bottle, and it says Bin 28, just below Bin 28, it should say Columna Shiraz. So this originally used to be a single vineyard wine back in 1959. And that's actually our first ever bin number is Bin 28. So we don't need to spend too long explaining what bin is. But yes, the vineyard itself, Columna, some of the oldest vines, in fact, in the world. You will see here, Susie, I know we had a chat about this a couple of days ago. You said some of these vines are like tree trunks. They are incredibly old. They give so much concentration. We're still allowed to grab exceptional fruit from it. And that bin 28 is where a lot of the fruit is still sourced. We are going to multi-region to help develop this wine. So it is now a multi-regional blend, but we do focus a lot on this columnist. It's perfect for what you call Shiraz ripened process, because Shiraz deals with a lot more of a warmer climate than Cabernet does. It can be tolerable to those high temperatures. It's a thick-skinned grape, gives lots of ripe, full-body character, lots of structure, and that's why when we see Cabernet in some of those Shiraz blends, it kind of edges the corners. So we use Cabernet as that kind of fine tuner, whereas Shiraz is all.
And this one is 100% Shiraz.
That middle palate. So you should see that with bin 28.
So this one is 100% Shiraz. As you say, predominantly, here we go, there's the technical sheet, thank you. Predominantly Barossa fruit and those very, very old vines. So how old? I'm thinking 110 years, perhaps?
Yeah, 110 to 130 in some cases. It's incredibly old. And if you think the average lifespan for a vine is about 10 to 30 years before they're grubbed up and replanted. So far, far longer than you would expect with a vine.
And I guess the reason that they're normally grubbed up much younger is that they're not considered profitable when they start to produce fewer and fewer grapes. But when those grapes are used to make premium wines that have a proper price tag attached to them, then the intensity of flavour, the concentration of flavour in those scant grapes that come off those vines, when they're prized and treasured, then you do get profit out of them. And thank goodness that not all of them were grubbed up, because you get these wonderful resources of old vine material out in Barossa and some of these other regions, but particularly in Barossa. And I think, they don't just look like tree trunks, they look like elephants' feet.
It was elephants, wasn't it?
Huge trunks. There should be something for scale in that picture. They are just, you think, is that a vine? I mean, it's just vast because it's just grown there for over 100 years and getting kind of turning round and screwed up and curled up and bigger until they just look quite extraordinary. But yeah, wonderful old vines. When do they actually finally give up the ghost?
I'm yet to actually see really this being. We're always very much trying to hold on to as much as we can with them, but they still produce a good amount of fruits, and they're very vital. In fact, this is block 42 vineyards. Yes, we do have random names for our vines, but this is actually block 42, and we do have a wine that is solely called block 42. So it's just fruit from here, and actually in 2012. In a Sotheby's auction, the bottle of this wine went for $165,000. So a vast quantities of money for single vineyard from those vines in particular. But we're actually trying some of that fruit in our glass today, and that's what I really love about 28. Is this you're getting notes of extraordinary wine coming through. And a bit of if I may, Susy, a bit of a brief story about bin 28 is that it's a bit of a baby for me. I first joined Penfolds and this wine was flung towards me, and I really had to take care of it. And what I think with bin 28 is this perfect split between quality and price. And I think for what it is, it's exceptional. It can keep for as long as you want. It can be drunk fairly relatively early on, and it's for me a wine that gets people used to cellaring wine at home.
So while Toby's frozen, very briefly, it's £32 this wine from Harvey Nichols, Harrods, Berry Brothers, Ocado, Majestic, among others. 12 months in American oak hogsheads. Now let's do a bit of geeky oak talk, because American oak has a tighter grain and it tends to give a more spicy characteristic, but American oak is known for having a looser grain and tends to give a slightly softer, sweeter, more coconutty character. You see in Rioja that in particular, because they are great users of American oak, although some Rioja bodegas do use French oak or a combination nowadays. But interesting that this bin 28 goes in American oak.
Yes, so the idea to kind of understand American and French is if it's a large, big, full-bodied wine, put it in American oak, because it can withstand that beastly character that grapes can kind of give out, and it can really kind of tame that down. But the more finer examples of fruit, such as the Coonawarra Cabernet we just tried from Wynns, that's always French oak, 100% French oak every single time. So it's all about the kind of power of grape or power of must once pressed. And that's how you look at it. So very interesting, yes. And we do trial with French oak with some of these larger characters, but with bin 28, it's always American oak, just because of the kind of concentration of flavor that we have to tame down.
It works really, really well. I mean, there's a lovely plush fleshiness to this wine. Even though it's young, it's drinking really, really well now. I'd say it's more ready than the Black Label. I feel I shouldn't have pulled the cork on the Black Label. In some ways, it's fascinating, but I just want to know what it's like down the line. But this will be fascinating down the line, but it's drinking really, really well now already. Why is this one under cork and the other two are under screw cap?
Yeah, this is a fascinating conversation that which takes hours to kind of explain, but for the sake of it, I'll cut it down. I did a lot of my studies on closures, which is quite nerdy, but I like it. So basically, it's a lot to do with market, and actually Europe has this fascination with cork being better quality wine, and Australia are very opposite to that thinking. In fact, 75% of Australian wine is under screw cap. The bin 28 in Australia is actually screw cap. It's just because of the market. Some people argue that screw cap keeps it fresher. I actually tend to think cork allows it to oxidize slowly over time. So I feel like it actually helps the kind of aging character to wine. But if you're opening it young, I would just tend to say have it in the screw cap. It won't affect it at all.
I tend to agree, and I used to be very pro screw cap because I was so sick of the number of corks that gave my wines, cork taint, TCA. I have to say I do think corks have got better, and I'm finding that happens much less often now. It's really unusual now to find a corked wine, although it still does happen. But at least you know for a fact it won't happen if the wine is under screw cap.
Yes.
But yes, you won't get that minute exchange with air with a screw cap that you will with a cork if you want to long age it. That's interesting because it's quite a controversial thing still, isn't it? Whether you use a screw cap or...
especially when you go to France.
Especially to Spain or Portugal.
Yes, Spain. Yes, of course. Yes, that's where most of the cork in the world comes from. If people didn't know, and just actually a fascinating one on that of cellaring. I always think this wine can really withstand test of time. I always say to people, if they're having a birthday or a celebration or an anniversary, or if this is a gift to someone, I would always give this for them to open up in however many years to celebrate that kind of occasion, because I really just think this is beautiful down the line and affordable as well, which is the big thing about it as well.
I think if it's all right with you, we'll all meet again in 25 years' time and see how the 2018 vintage.
I'll keep some bottles for you. Yeah, I'll keep some.
See how we fared. More to the point. So again, this comes from several different. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 8 different regions, mostly Barossa, but they're all the kind of premium wine regions. So McLaren Vale, Padthaway, Adelaide Hills, Langhorne Creek. These are the sort of top-notch names of South Australian red wine regions. Do you change where the fruit comes from year to year?
Yes, there's always vintage variation, but our anchor region is Barossa. We have to stay true to what the wine was originally. We don't like changing that. And that's a nice little nod that our winemakers are very much custodians as well as winemakers. They have to fulfill that kind of journey of travel from what the wines originally used to be and still making sure they taste similar to what they were when they were invented back with our previous winemakers.
Now, I'm sure everyone tasting has ideas about food matching with this one, but it's got a kind of slightly sweet spiciness, a kind of cinnamon and clove. It's soft and big and ripe. I'm thinking more perhaps into game dishes or tumnel stews, casseroles, perhaps that sort of thing, or maybe a peppered steak, something that will chime in with that slight spiciness that Shiraz always gives us.
Yeah, and I actually tend to go down a bit more of in less intense spice, but a kind of like a chickpea curry sort of area where it's still rich sauce, but tamed down on spice level in terms of heat level. And actually, what's fascinating, some years I actually get turmeric in this, which is a very odd, soft root character coming through. Not necessarily with the recent years, but some of them I do tend to get this kind of, like you said, Susie, it's this weird sweeter spice.
It is the sweeter spices in that, and there's a little bit of vanilla essence in it as well, which I guess is coming predominantly from the oak. But
yeah, that would be American oak.
Sweet. It is sweetly spicy rather than jammy sweet. So some plummy fruit, raspberry, cherry, and then cinnamon, vanilla. I get turmeric. That's good. I wouldn't have got that, but
it's a weird one.
I see what you mean. Are there any questions? Because we're kind of coming. Well, we are on the hour. So if people have got questions now, it might be a good time. And any more slides that we need to look at, Toby?
No, I believe that's it for the slides.
Oh,
just a picture, probably.
Oh, yeah. A nice thank you. Go home slide.
No. Welcoming question slide.
Does anyone want to unmute and ask any questions?
You're marvellous presenters, Susie and Toby. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you. Well,
Very kind, Orlando.
I would like to thank Toby hugely, because it's obviously wonderful when someone from the winery actually is there to give us the in-depth stuff. But also, can I say a huge thank you to Rosamond and her team at R&R for bringing this to life. There she is, Rosa. Thank you very much indeed. Really, really generous. And obviously to Penfolds and Wynns for supplying such wonderful wines. Incredibly generous and really fascinating. And thank you very much to the Guild for letting us come and take over your Thursday evening and give us all that lovely Australian red wine tide mark.
Yeah. Susie, I really think it is for us to thank you. So let me make that absolutely plain, that it's been a fantastic event and the depth of your knowledge and expertise is mind-boggling of you and Toby. So thank you.
Thank you, and thanks very much to Kate and Jonathan for facilitating it.
It was wonderful to be back in South Australia again. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
we were about to say the same thing, because we spent a wonderful time down there about 3 years ago, and it was fantastic to be back there. And I have to say, I think the two of you were an incredible team. That was great teamwork going on, because it's incredibly difficult on Zoom and when things sort of don't quite work with internet and whatever. But
sorry about that.
No, it's not your fault. And
Great slides. I thought it was great slides. It all made complete sense. I learned so much. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you all carry on enjoying these wines. I think they're, I hope you drink them up quickly because you're enjoying them, but you don't have to. These big reds, if you reseal them, keep them somewhere quite cool and dark, you can drink them over the next 3 or 4 days. Toby's probably going to slap his forehead and say, no.
No, that's absolutely
They last pretty well.
Right.
Do we need to suck the air out? Do we need to do a vacuum in on them?
It's better.
No,
it does help. Yes,
yeah, it's better.
For these wines though, you can leave them a few days.
I mean, yes, you do need some kind of contraption if you're going to keep them for a long time, for many days. But I think if you're going to drink them over 2 or 3 days, they'll be fine. Just reseal them, keep them out of the sun, keep them away from the radiators, in preferably somewhere dark. They're big reds. They won't die on us for 2 or 3 days.
Fantastic.
Can I just say what a wonderful excuse to get absolutely plastered this weekend. Thank you.
And can I eat the bowl of chocolate I was told I have ready?
Yes, I hope people were nibbling on their snacks. I had some spicy charcuterie when I was tasting these wines a couple of days ago, different set of them ahead of this, and it was such a good match I ate it all, so that was a disaster, and I haven't driven anywhere to get any since, but I have been enjoying cheddar cheese and some salted almonds with these. They're fairly versatile. I'm still not sure about the fish, but let's all try them with fish.
I've had a wonderful evening tonight, and unfortunately the baby came in. Anyone who recognises the Guild's mascot will see she came in and stole most of my snacks, which was quite annoying. But if I may, I'd love to ask a really geeky question. Toby, can you tell me a little bit more about the trellising of those ancient vines? I'm very interested to know.
Yes, very. Do you know your trellisings well? I think I've ever said that to someone.
Say I do. Yeah, I'm really sorry, but yeah.
Okay, good. So a lot of Geneva curtains on there, and there's a lot of double guillots is our standard form. Depending on where we go, if there's lots of wind, we go for those goblet trains, so very much close to the ground, very much less affected by the wind. But those larger vineyards for like Klimner, so the old ones, yeah, they're all Geneva curtains. They're all double Geneva curtains for them. You know, back then it was an experiment, so every vineyard you go into is a completely different scene. You know, now we've nailed it down to what we think is perfect for each region, but those older ones are very much they don't look uniform, should I say, and I always think they're fascinating to walk through.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you, that's wonderful. Really, really great tasting. Thank you so much.
If anyone does have any questions after the event or didn't feel like asking them right now, please just send them through to Jonathan. Well, is that a good idea? I'll either answer them or ping them over to Toby and we can get the answers.
Yeah, more than happy to answer it.
Fantastic.
Thank you all so much. Honour to give a talk to you guys.
It was really, really interesting and fabulous wines. Really, really, really fantastic wines to taste.
Brilliant.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great
Carry on
event.
enjoying them.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Lovely evening.
Thank you so much, Susie and Toby and Rosa particularly. I've got to go now because I've got my grandson visiting. I'm too excited. So I'm really sorry, guys. I've got to go. Thank you all again.
Thanks, everybody. Have fun.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Hugely appreciated, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks a million.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
I keep trying to unmute and then everyone's
No,
disappearing.
And now it's just us.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed that, Jonathan.
I did, but I don't have the wines.
Oh no! Oh, boo!
You know what? Priority for guild members, so
Yeah, and I bet they got snapped up quickly.
they did. There was a waiting list, so
Well, you see, I was luckily because I know my wine. I opened the cheap one tonight, and then I'll open the other two at some point in the future. So yes, very pleased with that. Yeah,
very
a bit of industry knowledge. You
Oh
see.
yes, this is what we need.
Right, I'm off to attend to the baby.
Okay.
Bye, Jonathan. Take care. Bye.